Proposition 306, we have representing the Arizona Advocacy Network, Mr. Joel Edmond, and the Stop Taxpayer Money for Political Parties, Mr. Dan Godsich. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. On your ballot, you will read that the law would prohibit candidates who finance their political campaigns with public funding from the Citizens Clean Elections Commission from transferring any campaign funds to a political party or private tax-exempt organization that attempts to influence elections and subjects the Commission's rulemaking procedures to regulatory oversight. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and we'll give you 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and your organizations and position, please.
Hi, thank you for letting me be here. My name is Dan Godsich, and I am here on behalf of Stop Taxpayer Funding for Political Parties. Bait and switch. We've all heard of that. If there was a car dealership that did an advertisement for a vehicle, and then you went down there and you said, that's a great price for that car, and you went there and they said, oh, that car already got sold or whatever, but we have this other one for you that's more expensive, it's better and shinier and all that, and you go and do that, and then you found out that they never had that original car that they advertised, that place would be in big legal trouble and you'd be mad. Well, the same thing happened in our political process in 2016. There were some candidates who got their $5 contributions in order to qualify for their clean elections funding, which is public funding, translation, taxpayer money, in order for them to run for office, and promptly there was no campaign going on. In fact, one of those happened right here in Maricopa in Legislative District 11. One of the people here said, I have this candidate who's running against me and I don't see signs, I don't see mailers, I don't see anything going on. What happened? So then when they did their financial disclosure, lo and behold, they had donated their clean elections money to a state political party. That just seems wrong to me because this was something that was originally set up to be for clean elections and had become a money laundering scheme. So several people went to the Clean Elections Commission and said, well, you guys need to clean this up. It looks like there's a loophole here. So they looked at it and they said, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll do some regulations on that. And lo and behold, they came out and they made it worse. They said, not only can you do that, you can give it to other organizations that do political activity. So you can have, let's say, a labor union, or maybe the National Rifle Association, or maybe the Sierra Club could go and put up one of their members and say, okay, we got a bunch of our members, give you $5 and you're going to get on the ballot, and then you get that money and they get that taxpayer money and they turn around and contribute it to them to use for election purposes. Well, I think that's very much against what the original principle of the Clean Elections Law was. It was in order to clean up things, not to make them money laundering schemes. So if you vote yes on Prop 306, what it'll do is just what Scott read earlier. It will prohibit candidates who get clean elections funding, taxpayer funding, to give it to a political party or to another entity that works to influence elections. For me, that seems to be going back to the taxpayers, the voters, and saying, let's clean this up so we go back to the original intent of our Clean Elections Law. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Edmond.
Thank you. My name is Joel Edmond. I'm with Arizona Advocacy Network. We're a nonpartisan organization that works to protect democracy in Arizona, And for us, that means especially making a democracy that works for regular Arizonans and not for wealthy special interests, whether those are special interests on the left or on the right. So, given all you just heard about money and political parties, you may be wondering why we are on the no side of this issue. Well, one, I want to respond quickly to this political party piece, but frankly, it's not the main story that's going on here. But just to respond to it briefly, it has been illegal for years for candidates, whether they're clean candidates or traditional, it's been illegal for clean candidates to simply give money to political parties. That is already against the law. And in fact, the regulations that we just heard about from Clean Elections were designed to make it easier for them to figure out who is potentially just donating money to a political party. The idea that they're somehow encouraging this thing is absurd. The Clean Elections system and the Clean Elections Commission was passed by the voters to be an independent and nonpartisan watchdog. And they take that responsibility very seriously as somebody who tries to be a watchdog on the watchdog. I can tell you they take that responsibility very seriously. It's a much less sort of partisan body than, say, the state legislature is. And it's designed to be people who are not really political insiders and who are looking out for our interests. And so that's why we're really concerned about this, because the other piece of this proposition that you didn't hear at all about from the yes side and won't hear very much about at all from them is because is that it would make it easier to spend unaccountable, secret, dark money in Arizona, right? We've heard a lot about dark money, both from the initiative that almost made it on the ballot and from past elections here, but this is, you know, those ads that say paid for by Arizonans for a better Arizona or something like that, and you have no idea who's actually paying for it, right? And often because they're secretive, they're nastier, they're more deceptive, and they're really just poisoning your airwaves, filling your mailboxes with mail. Well, the Clean Elections Commission is our one independent, nonpartisan body that tries to do what they can to require some basic amount of disclosure so that voters have the right to know who is spending that money, right? Who is trying to influence your vote. Well, the dark money groups for the last couple of years have been trying to stop Clean Elections from doing that with this maneuver by having it work for a body that's politically appointed. It's a bunch of political insiders that are appointed by the governor. And let me tell you, we're nonpartisan. Whoever the next governor is, whether it's Doug Ducey still or David Garcia, I don't know why we would want our watchdog, the people whose job is to make sure politicians and the entities that support or oppose them are following the law, why we would want them to report to a politician of whichever political party, right? But that's the main change that Prop 306 would make. So if you want more dark money in your politics, vote for 306 by all means. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience.
Yes, I have to set up this question. I ran for state office twice, and both times on Clean Elections. The amount of money they give you is so pitifully small that being able to, the amount of money they gave me, I spent out of pocket. I matched it. So the idea that Clean Elections is a lot of money that you're giving to political groups. I paid the firefighters to make signs for me and deliver them all over the state. Both parties do that. So the idea that you're supporting some sort of groups, I don't understand where you come off, where giving money so that common people can run for office is a bad thing. And that's, when you say that to me, that's what you're telling me.
Well, to be clear, from the language that Scott put there, this does not stop anyone from getting Clean Elections money. And you say it's a small amount of money. Well, there was $100,000 in the last election cycle that was given to a state political party doing this. That, okay, in the grand scheme of things, maybe that's not the largest amount of money, but that's a substantial amount of money. Okay, that's $100,000 that went to a state political party. It's also, I think there's a basic fundamental principle here, which is why should taxpayer dollars be able to go to a political party? Why should taxpayer dollars be able to go to a special interest group that's doing political purposes? I think there's a problem with that there as well. In regards to talking about that there's another part of this as well. The Clean Elections Commission put the person on the other side of this here put halos on their heads and made them into great people and everything like that, and I can understand that. But part of it is that the Clean Elections Commission over the last few years has decided that they have become the election police of the state of Arizona, which is not what the original ballot proposition was about. It never said they were to do that. I mean, our founding fathers talked about checks and balances. Right now, the way the Clean Elections Commission is operating is there's no check and balance on them. They think they're above the law because they got voted in by the voters, so they're able to make rules however they want to make them, and they're not accountable to anybody. So, you know, checks and balances, what our founding fathers used. More modern term is people saying they need to stay in their lane. That's what the other portion of this is to make sure that there's a regulatory check and balance on the rules that the Corporation Commission is doing, because when he talked about, well, they decided they're the only ones who can regulate dark money or something like that, that was never in the original creation of the Clean Elections Commission. They took that upon themselves as their duty. They did. They came up, they said, we have that right to do that when they were created to regulate clean elections monies. But they decided they could regulate other election monies as well. So they were stepping out of their lane. This is just getting them back in their lane.
Go ahead, sure.
Yeah, I just want to respond to the last point. I don't know whether election police or I prefer a watchdog, but that was exactly the idea of creating the Clean Elections Commission. If you read the Clean Elections Act, that, by the way, the voters put on the ballot and the voters passed, whereas this is coming from the state legislature, the idea was to have an independent, nonpartisan body who was enforcing those campaign finance laws, because otherwise it's up to politicians to regulate politicians. And how good of a job do you think they're going to do, right? And so that's what the voters meant to do in 1998. You can go and read the Clean Elections Act. This enforcement authority is plainly in there, and it was a big piece of what the voters were voting for when we passed that 20 years ago. So the idea that, this is some, we're correcting clean elections, no, we're correcting the voters, right? But to do that, we're talking about this issue of political parties to get people riled up in kind of a partisan back and forth. But really, this change is, I think, the main piece of what's going on here. And it is a pretty radical change to the system we have, and would put kind of political insiders who, again, work for the governor or whoever the governor happens to be at the time, to give them a lot more say over what our independent watchdog gets to do.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
I was here 20 years ago when we passed clean elections, and all they talked about was having the funding. Nobody talked about this regulatory role in any of the advertising when people were trying to get this passed on the ballot. I don't think that was put out there for the voters at all. So to say the voters went ahead and that was what they wanted, that was not part of the advertising for clean elections at the time either way. So that was kind of a bait and switch too, if that was the real intent.
We've talked a lot about including the gentleman who asked the question, seemed to infer that clean elections didn't do the trick for him, even though it helped him, but it was half of what he needed to compete in a campaign in terms of funding. The purpose of the act, and I'm going to quote here so I don't get it wrong, originally, and again, this is 20 years old, is to restore citizen participation and confidence in our political system, improve the integrity of Arizona state government, and promote freedom of speech. Has it achieved that?
I think the act as passed by the voters 20 years ago took us a long way towards diminishing the influence of big money in politics. Now, there are a couple things that happened along the way. One is that the voters and the folks who wrote the act and got the signatures couldn't envision everything that would change 20 years from now. We didn't talk about dark money in 1998. This idea of groups spending millions of dollars and not reporting at all where their money came from, that basically, that wasn't a feature of our political system. So I do think there are things we could do to improve the clean election system, to actually strengthen the system. But the other thing that's happened that's made the system, unfortunately, less useful for candidates so that we can have regular folks running for office without having to depend on, calling up, folks who can cut large checks, is that it's been under attack. It's been under attack both by a political establishment who doesn't like having politics be more responsive to people, and it's been under attack, frankly, by dark money groups, including the dark money group that's behind this proposition. They've been working very hard over the last 20 years to weaken the system, and unfortunately have been successful in some regards. So I do think there are things we could do to improve the system. Unfortunately, Prop 306 is a step in the wrong direction.
And Joe, would you mind just taking a step further and just giving us a 60-second summary of your position as we conclude?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said up top, I think Prop 306 at the core is really about whether you want more dark money in our political system. If you do, you should vote for it, because it will hamstring our independent watchdog, make it report to, again, a body that's appointed by the governor, whoever the governor is at the time, and whose job is to make sure state agencies follow the governor's political agenda. Why we would have our campaign finance enforcement body report to any politician of any political party, that makes no sense. That is not what the voters passed 20 years ago. We created this watchdog, and now it's our job to protect it from the groups that are attacking it. Thank you.
Why should taxpayer dollars go to political parties? That's a basic question right there. Why should taxpayer dollars go to special interest groups? And as my friend here is saying, he sees an even bigger oversight role for the Clean Elections Commission and all of our elections things. So since they opened up the door now with this rule that organizations such as a labor union or the National Rifle Association or the Sierra Club can get these monies donated to them, since this, as he calls it, a watchdog, I call it election police, are now going to get the camel's nose under the tent and say, well, there's taxpayer dollars going to those organizations. I guess we have a say in how those organizations should be run, including the political parties. Because once you do that, once you have taxpayer dollars in something, then people are going to say, then we have a right to regulate into them. So if you want your political party, the group that you like to support or whatever, and if you want people putting up sham candidates for their organization, if you want, members of some group, a labor union or the National Rifle Association, to put up a sham candidate as a money laundering scheme to get them money, then vote no on this. But I say that if you want to make sure that taxpayer money doesn't go to these special interest groups or to political parties, when you make your ballot picks, vote yes on 306.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We really appreciate your information and your insights.